start. So we've got like a fairly small, intimate little group here. And maybe what we do is we do a quick kind of like round of intros. But one thought that that Bill, you had, which I think would be quite good, if everyone kind of on the call is open to it, is actually if there are just kind of some specific questions or thoughts that people have that they just want to ask, we can make it a bit of a roundtable, kind of more conversational than it being more like a presentation or like a Q&A type session. And so maybe we do that and we all kind of like introduce ourselves.
Love that idea.
Sure.
Yeah. Alrighty, cool. Well, like, shall I kick off an intro to myself and then hand over to yourself, Bill, and then go around the room like that? Yeah. Alrighty, cool. So hi everyone, lovely to meet you all. My name's Corinne Thompson. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called ECAP. We do two core things. So one is we do financial due diligence for different investors. So we do that for about 15 to 20 investors in UK, Europe, and a couple in the US as well. We write red flag reports when they're investing in companies. And then the other side, we do fractional CFO work for companies who are fundraising or going through an M&A process. So we build financial models, investor decks, data rooms, market sizing, that kind of collateral that's required as part of a round. So lovely to meet everyone on the call today. Bill.
Thanks, Corinne, and thanks everybody for coming today. My name's Bill Kenney, and I lead a company called Meet, and we help international B2B and B2G companies expand in the US through trade shows, events, and strategic connections. I guess to Keith or Guy.
Up to you, Keith.
Thank you, sir. My name is Keith Langbo. Good to meet everybody, and I'm excited to hear from Corinne and Bill and the things that you do. But I'm the founder of a company called Celica, and we do recruitment solutions for companies, tailored recruitment. And specifically, we've been helping companies that are trying to come from the UK and EMEA, and really Asia Pac now a bit as well, expand or land and expand in the US. And we help them with their initial recruitment. And then I also spend a majority of the time right now on some new AI products that we've been building to improve the data behind.
Thanks, Keith. You froze there for a second.
Did I freeze just in time? I tried to time it right when I was talking to freeze. So bingo, mission accomplished.
Exactly. Well, hey, I'm Guy. I am Keith's UK representative. I'm a director of EMEA. I've been working recruitment for the last 8 or so years. And my job is to assist companies in their international expansion as well as recruit locally for them.
Awesome. Now I know personally Inga on the line who's joined because she used to work at a company I did some work for. So Inga, I guess, do you want to do a quick intro on yourself? And is there anything actually out of this session today that you would like to get out of it? You're on mute as well.
This is going well. Yes, I was hoping to go unnoticed. Yes, hi everyone. My name is Inga. I work for a company called Definely. It's a legal software company who is going through a significant growth spurt. And yes, I kind of want to learn a bit more about expansion. This is where we're heading, to US expansion. That's really the main reason.
Yeah, and just to augment what Inga was saying, like Definely is expanding across the US at the moment. And Bill, I know, and Inga, jump in here if you want, but like there's a lot of like trade shows and conferences that the team go to in the US that, I don't know how targeted or specific or how tailored it is, but it might be a good one to kind of talk to a little bit further as well on this call.
Sure. Yeah, I guess, Inga, are there any specific questions around business development or growth that are part of what you're trying to find out today?
Honestly, I have about 1 million questions.
Good.
But I think I will just let you all, talk and then kind of ask questions as they come up, because if I start asking questions, we will be here all week.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's totally good. yeah, maybe the next person, then we can hop into some content if that makes sense, Corinne.
Yeah, sure. Whitney, do you want to give an intro on yourself? You're on mute
You're
as well.
muted.
Yep, that's what happens. My name is Whitney Kahn. I work with Celica as well. I'm a senior client director, and I'm on the U.S. side, so I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and been working with companies all over the country as well as some international companies, and looking to expand that knowledge of what people are looking for when they are expanding to the U.S. and how that all works, because it's still a new thing for me as well.
Awesome. And then I think we got on the call Alexis. Are you still there?
Hi, yes, I work alongside Bill, so I'm here to support and listen in and learn.
Awesome. And then BLK, is that you, Bill, your note taker?
It is
Nope.
not.
Ah, okay.
Sorry, that's me. Hi, I'm Ben.
Okay, hey.
I'm here. Hi, Corinne.
Nice to
Hi,
meet you.
everyone. I know a couple of people on the call, Bill and Guy. But yeah, I wanted to hop in. I work with a lot of UK and US businesses and help with sort of banking and foreign exchange. So that's my background, but saw the title and wanted to just sort of listen out. If I can help with anything, I'm always more than happy. But I like hearing Bill and Guy speak, so I thought I'd like to hear them a little bit more.
Amazing. That's awesome. And then last but not least, Lena from our side, if you're on the line. Nope, she's gone shy, quiet. Fair enough. Awesome. Well, look, why don't we kick off? So maybe if I start by just sort of asking some questions to Bill, Keith, and Guy. And then if anyone wants to kind of like join in, ask questions, chime in, please feel free. So I think maybe Bill, to kind of kick off with yourself. And this is actually a question that Lena wrote down, but I am intrigued. Can you talk us through a little bit around practical examples, of when a company got it right and examples of when a company got it wrong from your experience of expanding into the US?
Sure. Almost to Inga's point, how long do we have? Yeah, I think in terms of getting it right, I should explain that most of our clients come to us after they fail. So unfortunately, we see we understand well sort of the get it wrong. There certainly are those that come in and get it right. Quite often it's on their second attempt, because they've opened up sort of to understanding the US better. But I'd say the things that and my point of view or perspective is from sales and marketing, so that client acquisition side. So that where they get it right, I think, is fundamentally that they have tightly defined who their customer is, and they've chosen a dense geography and industry vertical to focus on, and they look to get traction in that and develop a repeatable system in that tighter geography and in that tighter sort of definition of a vertical. And so by doing that, then think of almost every industry that you go into in terms of try to sell to, and every geography is sort of like learning a language. And so, I think you have to think about sort of a year or two down the road when you kind of hire your first American to sell for you. You want them to come into a number one, a working system, but also one that's fairly easy to repeat, so that if you are in 6 regions and you're in 10 industries, that's a lot of languages to learn, and so it becomes very complicated. And so the more you can create that density, not only is it a much more efficient sales process and easier to create the second and third and fourth sales once you have references and testimonials and all that in kind of a known with a known commodity, but it also is going to be much easier to expand and bring people on board. And I think, you know, I think most people understand how kind of expensive US salespeople are. Well, they also turn over fairly quickly if they don't see success. You know, in a fair, nobody expects sales to be easy, but also nobody expects them to be impossible. And if they view it as impossible, then they just move on. So, you know, I think the real key, and I think where the people that are successful get it right, and I think you can get you know, you expect to get, you know, to make mistakes, but I think if you get sales right, if you get business development right, if you can get traction and a repeatable process, you can get a lot of other things wrong, at least temporarily, and still succeed. You can't fail at sales. You know, ultimately, you're not sustainable. And so, you know, it's really critical to sort of figure that out and find the sort of shortest path to a repeatable system. So I would just say that those who get it right kind of understand that, you know, it's a journey to create traction in the US. It's not, you know, it's not automatic or assumed, and you have to be kind of prepared for a process. And I think those that make the mistake kind of look at it as the whole country and trying to, you know, sort of boil the ocean or eat the elephant in one bite. That's going to be painful and likely not work very well.
And when you work with companies, what are your starting points? Is it basically understanding ICP, understanding what states this was landed? Like what does that actually look like?
So some of you can probably tell I'm on a sailboat, so I'll give you a maritime metaphor for what Corinne just very smartly asked. So, so the story I would tell is really think of going fishing. So anyone that's going fishing, basically, whether consciously or subconsciously, asks themselves probably 3 questions before they leave their front door. And I think I would suggest when you enter a new market or even launch a new product, you want to ask these 3 questions. So what do I want to catch? In other words, who's my customer? And so in order to sort of answer that, you have to understand there are 34,000 species of fish. There are lots of subspecies, like hundreds in some cases per species. And so narrowing it down to these specific fish, that species and ideally subspecies, allows you to answer the second 2 questions much better, which is, where am I going to go fishing, right? So you need to go where the fish are. That's really important. So what ocean or river or stream or lake, and what time of year, what depth, all of those really critical locational questions. And then finally, what bait am I going to put in the water that attracts and converts them? And so I think you know, if you, I mean, we're just kind of going through a process now where a lot of our content is about prepping for 2026. And I think those 3 questions, they seem so simplistic. It's so rare to see a company that understands them and actually builds their marketing strategy around that. Quite often, most companies are speaking to a much broader audience, and therefore they end up with a very inefficient sales funnel, because they end up, and you know, actually having staffing experts and recruiting experts on the call today is so appropriate for this. But yeah, at least what I've always heard from people that are expert in staffing is the best way to hire good people is to have good candidates, right? And I think the same is true in sales. Is, you know, the best way to have good sales is to have good prospects. And you know, it's about quality prospects, and you attract them by speaking to them, learning their language, and communicating in a way that that resonates and they respond to.
And Guy or Keith, in terms of finding good candidates, like what does that look like, that process?
You or me?
You go for it, sir. You got the answer.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of finding good candidates, it's client dependent, right? It depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for an AI engineer at the moment, it's going to be pretty difficult on a H-1B visa, you know, in the US. But yeah, at the end of the day, recruitment's recruitment wherever you want to go and find someone. I believe when you enter the US, you need to go and look for good salespeople. As Bill kind of alluded to, it's your first point of call. A good salesperson in the US is very different personality-wise to a good salesperson in the UK. You've got to look for different metrics, you know. If you're first expanding to the US, you're likely a smaller company. You don't want to go and hire someone from a big company because they're going to go and do different things and they're going to have a different understanding of commercial strategy. So you've got to go and look for different things, essentially. You know, you've got to have someone who understands that you can't sell British culture in the US. You have to have British culture as your values, but you still got to have American personality, so to speak.
Understood. And just to the point that Bill raised around compensation differences, like how different are those expectations?
I'll jump on this one, and I'll just add to something Guy said before there. The key thing he said is you have to understand who you are and what it is. And I think clarity is a huge part of this when you go to hire in the US, knowing what sort of company you are, whether it be in the UK or EMEA or Asia Pac or wherever it may be, knowing what sort of company you want to be in the US is going to greatly differentiate the types of people in the candidate pools that you look towards. And we see a lot of people that don't think through it enough up front. And they certainly, Corinne, do not think about compensation and the differences. And I'll go so far as to say 90 to 95% of the time when we hear about a company that's trying to expand in the US, their first thought is to typically come to us and say, let's talk about hiring in New York City, or let's hire in Silicon Valley or out in California. Sometimes they'll say Florida as well. Those are the top 3 locations.
Okay.
New York City and California, and depending where you are in California, but just about all of California, are the most expensive markets for the most part within the US. And so I would say it's easily somewhere between 2 to 5 times more expensive than you would see in London, as an example. And I split time between the two right now, so I really get to see this close up. 2 to 3 times more expensive, without question. Other parts of the US could be a bit more reasonable, depending where you are. If you go to the central US and some of the central states, the compensation can be fairly equal to a lot of folks in London and other parts of Europe, certainly in larger cities. But for the most part, we see compensation throughout the US, especially for the salespeople, especially for those kind of player coach type of people that a lot of these companies really need to land and expand, that the compensation is going to easily be 2 to 3 times more. And I don't think they're ready for that, and they don't understand it. And I'll go so far as to say that the way that those compensation packages are built are not often, there's typically a lack of understanding on how to build those and make sure that they are built in the right way with the right levers and the right incentive points to really tie it in.
Got it. And Bill, Guy, and Keith, is it worth it then? Is it worth expanding into the US?
So I'll give you a stat that we see all the time, and just so you see it, Deirdre looks like she has a question. So just a quick thought. So of the companies that we see that become successful in the US, and obviously this is not, kind of the whole market, but those that are going to be successful, that are successful, generally by the 3rd year in the US, their US operation, sales, and so on are bigger than where they are everywhere else in the world combined. So, it's not a perfect answer, but it becomes, for a lot of companies, I think, fairly irresistible because of market size.
Got it.
Yeah, I think just following. I'm sorry, I'm going after you.
No, go for it. Yeah. No, go.
I was just going to say, obviously, the US is the nucleus of the global economy. You know, if you were to go and expand anywhere first, it's there, but it's also the first place that's likely going to kill your business internationally as well. You know, it's the highest risk and highest reward, so it's worth it if you've got a good plan, is what I'd say.
Well said. Maybe, Corinne, we can check on these questions if they're relevant. I think both Inga and Deirdre have their hands raised. So,
No, actually, so thank you. So I have a HR background and I've lived and worked in both regions and globally as well. So Kareen it is rather than Karina, sorry. All I was going to do is offer my help if you want to, and I don't know if people do these on these calls, so Bill, you can coach me afterwards on you do, you don't. But having had that market expertise in both regions and in Europe, I was just going to offer it. So how do you do market research on a job description? And what does that look like? And how do you understand the different market and the different cultures and what that plays into market and stuff like that? There is a process for it all. So happy to walk you through that and explain it to you from the perspective I would have having experience in that area if you want.
Yeah, and sorry, what is your background? Just because we did intros at the beginning, but I think you are not.
Oh, I couldn't join earlier. Sorry. So I can share my LinkedIn profile. I don't mind doing that if you want. But I'm Dublin, Irish, but I've actually lived. I'm Irish American, and I've worked in HR, finance, IT. I've done global transformations. I've worked for food farm, FMG companies, and also for health services and pharma and a bunch of other stuff. So I've done change management, I've done transformations, worked on various sides of the world on the pond, because I've also worked in Asia and Latin America as well.
Awesome. All right, and Inga, another Irish lady, you put your hand up.
Well, technically I'm Lithuanian, but I live in Northern Ireland. Okay, I don't even know what I am anymore. Yes, just on recruitment and sales piece, I have more like practical question. So in Definely, we do have scalable, repeatable, proven model, which works very well. We have people in the UK selling to US clients, and that works very well. But when I compare sales from US people versus UK, there's a massive disparity. It seems like US people are just not selling. And I'm trying to figure out what could be the problem. You know, as an example, we have, say, someone in the UK who started 3 months ago, they're already ramped up and selling. And we have someone in the US, and Corin, you will probably know who I'm referring to, who is the highest paid salesperson in the company, who hasn't sold a single thing in 12 months. Where could the issue be?
I'll take a first swing at that, Inga. I think it's, first of all, I wouldn't say that is always the case, right? I've seen having offices on both sides of the pond in the UK and in the US. I've seen it go the other way as well, and sometimes it depends on the individual. Sometimes it depends on the vertical or the industries, if you will. I do think, at least from my experiences, and Guy, I'll be curious to see how you feel now, having seen both sides. Culturally, the sales process is often different in the US, and I don't want to say it's more relationship or relational sales, but I do think it is a bit less aggressive and a bit of a slower, longer sales process than what I've experienced, at least in my short experience in London. I think if I had two people starting the same day, I would probably expect my UK salespeople to deliver something faster than my US people, just generally to align with what you said. But I might expect my US salespeople to build deeper, heavier, less transactional relationships, especially in the recruiting industry, that are going to last longer and last for life, if that makes sense. Now, again, that's a big general statement. And I'll be, again, Guy, curious to hear what you think on this, but because I don't want to bash one or the other. I think there are pros and cons to both of those. And in fact, Guy and I have had this conversation. He's a bit more direct in how he goes about sales on some of these calls versus I am a bit softer on it in some ways. And I think it really depends on the market and who you're selling to. But any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, following on from that, culturally in how we sell, we are polar opposites. You know, Americans are, or people that sell in America understand that you sell emotive and big picture, and you don't necessarily talk about features, whereas we in the UK are naturally pessimistic and, you know, we'll tell you about the feature of a product and we'll tell you that this is the solution to your problem. Whereas in America, they'll say, this is the solution to your problem. And in 5 years time, this is what it can do for you, so to speak. So it's completely different and it's obviously received differently as well. And Keith is completely correct in that, you know, from a relationship selling point, in the UK, I think we've kind of developed a habit of being so ultra in such saturated and competitive markets. We get to the point faster because we're scared that competitors, you know, are already there. Whereas in the US, people are there playing the long game and a lot, you know, it's more of a referral culture, so to speak, is how I see it.
And to end this question, I guess, how long do you play the long game for, though?
I'll say I have some client relationships that have been my strongest clients now over decades that we didn't start doing business for, I would say easily 2 to 3 years at the start of our relationships. So I think that's a pretty long game. I think it's in most of my sales experience, and again, recruiting industry is very unique, and it's a totally different industry in the US than it is in the UK as examples, right? And the saturation levels in the UK and the specialization in the UK versus the US, where it's more of a generalist sort of market. So it's a very specific industry to talk about. But in the US, it is very much a long play. Especially as we're trying to get further and further away from the transactional ugliness of recruiting and more into the advisory consultative sort of approach as to where the industry is evolving and hopefully getting to. So I'll go years before I talk about trying to close business on some long play relationships.
Interesting.
Can I ask, Inga, what is it you're selling? What's the product or service?
Legal software. So then, sorry, just from that, a follow-up question. Is it really worth employing salespeople in the US then? Because UK people are able to come in and sell from UK to US market within a few months, but people in the US are not able to sell to their own market. And just to give you a bit of perspective, about 5% of our US revenue comes from US salespeople.
I think it completely depends on the vertical and what you're selling and the types of clients that you're going after. I think it's valuable to have both, but I think it's important to compensate them differently, give different incentives and different levers and different targets and different approaches and the types of clients you're selling to. It's not to say there aren't US salespeople that can close things quickly and get things done. I'm speaking very generally. I've also closed clients in a matter of minutes, right? And to go against the ones that took years. So I think it just really depends. And that you make sure that you're very clear about that up front when you're defining your needs for a US salesperson. If you want quick movement and someone to get to it, those people exist and there's a way to compensate them that's going to drive them towards that. And at the same time, not all good things happen immediately. So you got to have balance in what you're looking for. But as long as you're clear up front, those people do exist.
Yeah, also further to that as well, how much do you value, you know, face-to-face selling? How much do you value meeting people in person, you know? These British people who are obviously selling to the US are going to be working fairly antisocial hours, and they're not going to be able to meet people in person. So, you know, is your turnover naturally going to be a bit higher in the long run? Those are things to consider, right?
Awesome. We've also had some people have sneakily joined the call that have not introduced themselves, and so I am going to call you out. Brian, are you on the line?
I am. Thank you for having me. I'm with Celica as well. I'm
You are.
just getting some education here and trying to stay in the loop with my colleagues.
Amazing. And then we've got Katie Bowen. Oh, Katie maybe wants to stay on mute. That is fine. And then someone called BW, but I can't see their actual name. Keith, this is another one of your posse. Yeah.
I don't think BW is part of our team.
Okay. All right. Well, we can keep
Perhaps,
them.
but welcome, BW.
Keep them on mute for now. Awesome. Alrighty, cool. So I guess, Bill, maybe back to yourself. And I quite like this because sort of Inga's asked some questions kind of around this, but like, what is the biggest kind of misconception European companies have about entering the US market via trade shows?
Yeah, well, I guess this would go back to kind of the idea of two things. One is, that it makes sense to look at the whole country, and the other is that they need to go to the sort of big events in their industry, and that it's expensive. And certainly if you're going to your national or international events for your industry that are going on in the US, you're likely going to pay tens of thousands of dollars to participate. And that's, kind of a whole nother reason why kind of scaling in the US really should start with a local and regional strategy, because then events kind of range from free to hundreds of dollars, and versus the national and international events that are happening, in Las Vegas or Orlando or Chicago or whatnot. Those only happen once a year, unfortunately. So when you're developing, when you're growing, you kind of want a steady stream of prospects, and you don't want too many at a time that you kind of either can't properly follow up on, or that are just overwhelming. And instead you want, kind of 5, 10, 20 at a time. And that can happen much better on a local and regional basis. Plus the idea that you can iterate, you can test messaging, you can test different audience types and so on. And again, kind of both work on that system, but also at the same time build relationships. And the idea that, particularly if you're coming in periodically versus having people, resident in the US, it allows you to build up a network in a region as well. So you can, versus again, if every time you come to the US, you're going to a different region, you'll never build up a very good network. And so, and actually probably the number one thing we hear from successful founders, when we ask why they were successful, the number one thing they say is the network they built in the marketplace they went in. And so that's much more likely to happen, and happen quicker, when you're when you're consistent about where you go into. And the network will help you, whether it's finding the right locations, or certainly referrals to prospects, but also help you potentially find key employees, or anything you might need, connection to good partners and so on. So I think the misconception is really that it has to be expensive, I guess, is kind of the summary of all that. And I would say it's not only should be less expensive, but it also should be much quicker, if you focus more locally and regionally to start.
Corinne, I'm curious then, just from your side, in talking about, we've talked about speed now, as Bill just mentioned, and some of Inga's questions when it comes to the sales process and so on. How does that relate then into the companies that are coming in trying to get US capital? Are you seeing that as well? Is that timing different? Is that approach and process different?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, from the collateral you put forward, like in the US, well, in the UK and Europe right now, given where the market's at, you want to be showing like financial models that get you to profitability. If you go to one of the tier 1 US investors, they don't want to see profitability. They want to see that you're investing in that company through another, several rounds of funding, and that you're going to keep kind of like at least doubling revenues year on year. And I say at least, like, it's tripling your revenues year on year to get to that ultimately, beholden forest of you sell or you IPO for significant return for their fund. So from a basic thing, from a collateral perspective, I'd also say as well, like in the UK and Europe, like we'll jump on a Zoom. I think in the US, go out there and meet people in person, like land in Silicon Valley or land in New York and go see people in person. Like it has a lot more weight, I think, there than it does here. People want to raise from the US because the quantums tend to be bigger and the valuations tend to be bigger. But the reality is as well, like you have to be extra special because the US is such a big market. You guys already have your own companies to choose from. So you really got to differentiate as to like why you. And then you've also got to have traction in the US. The number of people who say, hey, we want to expand to the US and we're going to fundraise and we're going to expand to the US. Okay, go put some boots on the ground, go get some sales, go get that momentum, and then go to the US investors, because looking at a cold business plan that has expansion without any kind of like reality behind it as to what's happened already, it's just not going to get you far.
Yeah. It sounds, and hopefully I'm off mute here, sorry. It sounds like almost it can be a bit of a longer play game as well then, because you're not looking for the margins out of the gates, or they're not looking for it. They're looking for the longer term revenue growth with the eventual margins, right? Hence I feel like we see and hear about so many that are certainly pre-margins, pre-profit, even pre-revenue that are getting these things and these big investments. So you started to talk about what they had to have ready in order to make their pitches. What do these startups need to have in order to start getting those pitches in front of the U.S. investments? What's the list of things they've got to have going ready to show?
It's quite funny because we worked with a US company who were doing a Series A round of funding, and they were based in the Bay Area, and they had no model. They had a deck, and that was about it really. And they went around your kind of top tier one investors, and they got funding pretty quickly. Whereas I would say if you are UK European, you want to have deck, you want to have financial model, you want to have market sizing, and then you want to have, because things move faster in the US as soon as you start to get that kind of like bite and that traction. So then you want to have some high level kind of like documents in the data room if it's an early stage fundraise, and if it's a later stage fundraise, you need a lot more around kind of like the customer cube and how that's broken down by different industries, different sectors, size of companies, all your kind of, if you're in the SaaS space, it's got to be like your net retention revenue, gross retention revenue, rule of 40, magic number, like all your kind of SaaS metrics, like lined up basically and ready to go. So I would say it is harder as a UK stroke European company. And you also have to talk a bigger game, right? Like I would say a lot more like US companies obviously float. Like sometimes in recruiting in the UK, and you guys can maybe speak to this a bit more, I find when people are looking for a CFO and they're like, we want someone who's got M&A experience or fundraising experience. Like fundraising experience, fine. But like some of the best CFOs I personally worked with have come from the US to the UK, or have come from investment banking and corporate finance from the US, who've done a lot of rounds of funding or M&A to the UK, and they've just seen things on a bigger scale. And so again, it's like talking that bigger game when you're out there, versus I think in the UK, we can say things like, well, I think this, or I feel this, or whereas actually you've got to be a lot more, confident in your outlook on your business and your company. I don't know, maybe like I can only talk to CFO type recruitment here in the UK, but I guess both Bill and Keith, do you help companies in the US do the opposite, coming to the UK and Europe?
Yeah, we don't, just simply because knowing the sort of US market it consumes enough of our energy, and there's certainly enough interest in it, and I'd rather do things where we really feel like we have a domain expertise that is kind of hard to replace. So
I'll answer this from two different sides, Corinne. Do we have clients right now that come to us to help hire in the UK and EU, US-based clients? Yes. Is it as intentional in the same way that they want to land and expand, or is it market-driven or client-driven or product-driven or something like that? I think it's more often as a result versus a strategy sometimes that we've seen, at least in the little bit that we have seen it. The second way I'll answer this, though, is from my own experiences, having moved from the US to the UK over this past year and having spent the last year and a half or so now in the UK. trying to build and expand our experience. Everybody looked at me funny, like, what are you doing, right? We're all trying to go the other way. And especially in the recruitment space, all of the other recruiters looked at me and said, why did you come here, right? This market is super saturated and it's super competitive and you don't have a shot in never doing business here, basically is what they told me. We all want to come to the US where, you know, it's the land of opportunity and the margins are much bigger and I think that someone said it was like shooting fish in a barrel in the US compared to doing recruiting in the UK. And they all looked at me funny. I don't see it as much. I think there's a desire for US companies to do it, but many of them are just, no doubt, Bill, the grass always looks greener the other way. But I think a lot of them are still just trying to get across state lines, let alone across the pond. They're trying to figure out how to sell, you know, our company's headquartered in North Carolina, and it's a different sale in Virginia, just north of us, and a different sale in South Carolina, just to the south, and Tennessee to the west. All four of those markets, it's like selling between England and Germany and France and Italy. It's that unique within those.
Right.
And then you get within certain regions within those, like the state of Virginia, which also backs up to Washington, D.C., which is its own entity, its own state. I think it's a, I don't know, state or district or whatever officially it's called, but it's a whole nother world because of the governmental focus there. So I think a lot of US companies are busy enough trying to figure that out, let alone the major differences between a California and a New York City or Florida or whatever it may be, that they're not looking the other way. What I do see more of them, oddly enough, and at least I've heard about, is trying to reach out to Asia Pacific and some of those markets,
Right.
just because of the, I think, you know, Singapore's got a big financial clutch right now in the rest of the world and a big centralized market from that. So I see a lot of that from the financial companies or that are trying to touch the financial markets. And I think that it's just far enough away that they think if they can get that, maybe they're going to open the entire world.
Yeah.
But mixed experiences. But in general, no, I would say if I had one answer.
Got it. And actually, for both of you, do you see a lot of like interest from Asian companies expanding into the US, or do you get more from UK, Europe? Because we always in the UK, like I feel like we talk about this transatlantic crossing, but like, you know, we never look at the world map past those two countries. So I don't know. We'd love your kind of thoughts on that.
Do you want to go, Keith?
Sure. I would say, and maybe it's based on my network and based on our clients, so I wouldn't take this as a line in the sand, but I would say it's been fairly equal for us in our experiences. I wouldn't say one stands over the other. I think there's a natural between the UK and the US, just because at least the base language is similar. Not that everyone doesn't speak either English or I guess Chinese, the number one spoken, but I think it's been relatively equal. The surprise to me now that I spend more time on this side of the pond is how much is being pulled into other markets that I really wasn't thinking about when I was in the US, like Dubai and Riyadh and some of those larger programs. And I feel like a lot of the business expansion opportunities are talking about those regions and some of EMEA, if you will, the Middle East, versus the US, especially given some of the political factors at play right now in the US. I think it's been a tough year or so for the US in attracting businesses and some of the international relationships. And I see a lot of companies going the other way towards Dubai, for instance, right? Seems to be a hot topic right now in a big expansion. What are you seeing, Bill?
Yeah, I guess I'd offer a couple of thoughts. Actually, for those that aren't familiar, and I'll see while we're on the call if I can pull up the latest chart, but there's actually a London-based company called ShipShape.vc that puts out sentiment. They put out a monthly graph of UK companies' interest in expanding to the US. Surprisingly, and you'll see if I can pull up the chart and share it, you'll see that there is some up and down, but it's generally remained fairly consistent over the last couple of years, and actually has probably ticked up a bit. So, but the other thought I'd share, I think it's with between companies coming from different regions of the world to the US, I think there's a different experience depending on what coast you're in or on. I think those of us on the East Coast tend to see a bit more of Europe than we do Asia. I think those on the West Coast see a bit more of Asia than they do Europe. But actually one good bellwether of all of this is some of you may not be familiar, but there's a very big conference in the US that's run by the US Commerce Department every year called Select USA. And if you're interested in US expansion, whether you're already established and looking to grow further, or you're looking to enter and kind of gain your first customer, it's an incredibly valuable conference to go to. Every state in the union exhibits, plus a lot of service providers exhibit and participate. There's tons of content. It's a 3-day event, but I'd highly recommend it. In one room in 3 days, you can kind of answer a lot of questions and make tons of connections. And it's really irrespective of what industry you're going into. It's not a sales event. It's much more a network and connection and kind of resource event. But I had never, we've been going 8 years. I haven't yet been to an event that comes anywhere close to helping make sort of US market entry connections as this event does. But and I guess the reason I bring that up is you'll see a pretty equal distribution of companies from all over the world, and every US embassy essentially leads delegations that come into this event. So it's you'd see pretty equal representation from pretty much every region of the world.
What's it called again, Bill? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll put. Now I owe you 2 links. Let me put the Select USA link in. And it's a US Commerce Department event, and it's almost there. Here we go.
It's a great event, and it ties from the federal to a lot of the local and regional government organizations and things like that are pretty necessary. But I think that's a wonderful event to do.
Yeah, I just put the link in chat. But I would really and if you're interested in it, whether you're in wherever you are in the world, please feel free to reach out. We can connect you to your local embassy representative who leads their embassy's Select USA delegation. But it's easy enough to make that connection. It's a really productive event.
That's awesome. We in the UK we have DIT, or the Department of International Trade, who actually
Yes, Department of Business and Trade.
Yeah.
I've always found them, I've been on a couple of trade missions, but I've always found them incredibly helpful. I think, do you ever interact with them yourselves?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah, and so, like, for example, if you came with the delegation from the UK to Select USA, DBT is heavily involved in that delegation in terms of supporting and whatnot, and you'll actually go to an event probably on Sunday night or Monday night of the event. You'll go to an event at the British Embassy in Washington. So really cool event. Plus, you get kind of the access to US entry, but you also make actually some really good connections for back home as well. So it can really have a variety of positive effects.
Got it. Awesome. Alrighty. I guess, is there any other questions from the floor at all? No. Are there any points, Bill, Keith, Guy, you want to bring up at all?
Well, actually, Corinne, a question for you, because I get asked all the time about fundraising in the US, and certainly the vast majorities of companies coming in, that's certainly part of their whether it's their need or part of their plan. And I guess are there places, and maybe even to reverse the question you asked to me, which was, what do companies do that, where they get it right, and where do companies kind of fail in terms of their kind of fundraising activities?
Yeah. Like what I would say is the VC model in the US is your typical VC model. It's your go mega big or go home. In the UK stroke Europe, we have a couple of those. I'd say the likes like Balderton or Atomico kind of fit that sort of mold. And then you've got the US kind of offshoots in the UK who have set up here in the UK. And then you've got, I'd say, the wider kind of range of investors who are not necessarily looking for those big kind of bold moonshots. They're more looking for companies that actually will get to profitability, and it's not going to be one that returns a fund. It's going to be a handful that, in an aggregate collectively between them, will return the fund. And so what I would say is that like a lot of companies are like, hey, we're going to go to the US because we're going to go after VC money. But actually, they're just not VC backable companies. They've got strong growth. They've done pretty well, but they're not of that kind of ilk of you're really going to like put all the cards on the table and lay it all on the line to just go kind of, big or go home type thing. And people often think that actually, you got to choose which pressure you want. And as a founder, you're under a hell of a lot of pressure. It's either the pressure of like building a company that gets to profitability, or it's building a company that you're just burning cash like crazy. There's a chance that you cash out, but you've got to hit these metrics, these top line metrics. And so what I would say is like before, going into the US or thinking about the US, like just having a bit of soul searching as to what kind of company you actually want to be and you actually want to build. Because, for those 5 to 8 years of your life, you just got to write them off to like being all in on the business. And I see some of the companies in the UK have done that. Like look at Revolut, like the CEO of Revolut, like having worked with the CFO personally myself with Revolut, he's like, the guy doesn't sleep. Like he's an absolute machine. And, and that's great, but like that's, he is all in and he's gone after that kind of like bigger piece. But there's also a high likelihood of those companies failing as well. And you've got to work out which pressure you're willing to take on. And then I'd say start in the UK stroke Europe with the American funds that have a base here. And there's quite a few of them who have a base here. So that and test it with them before you think, hey, I'm going to get on the ground out there. I'd say it is a lot more relationship based in the US, insofar as like a lot of the intros will come through. I've had lawyers make intros to really good US funds. I've had accountants or CPAs make intros to really good like fund accelerators. If you've been part of an accelerator program, like they can make really good intros. Like you gotta, cold emailing doesn't land that well. And if you speak to Speed Invest here in the UK, out of the something like 79 investments they've made, 2 came from like cold messages. I don't think it's the same if you speak to Andreessen Horowitz. Like none probably come from cold outreach. And so again, it's a different, it's just a whole different dynamic or mindset. But I would say for a lot of European companies, start here. Also go to some of the Asian funds as well. They move a lot slower than the US and the UK, but like your GICs of the world, the Tamasecs of the world, Khazanah in Malaysia is just absolutely massive. Like, there are funds out there that people don't think about, but have a lot of capital to deploy. And I would say are as good as like looking at some of these kind of US funds, because it maybe suits the profile of their business better.
I guess following on from that, obviously we're naturally, as a continent, Europe, we're really risk averse in investment, whereas in the US they're a bit more, as you said previously, they're more like a roller coaster in that they always reinvest and they keep on looking for growth, etc. Do you think European investment culture will ever kind of, I guess, lean more towards that US mentality in investment?
The problem is on the exits, right? You want a multi-billion-dollar exit. If you look at the London Stock Exchange, how many companies IPO here? Like
you know, and you compare it to say like the NASDAQ, or you compare it to, you know, the listings in the US, like it's a whole different like quantum. And I think until you solve that like end game of what that exit might look like, it's hard to work back into the kind of like, well, you know, if you want like a 10-15x return on that initial capital that you put in as a VC, like, and you look at what that return has to be and where that exit might come from, like that's a very, you know, different a different profile versus the US. So I think until we solve for that, actually I do think the US stroke Europe will be a slightly more subdued market overall, just in terms of like valuations and in terms of risk appetite. But I don't think it's a bad thing per se, if that makes sense. Like I think you got to have both. You can't have everybody doing moonshots and like, you know, just you know, like you've got to have, I personally think, a blend. And I think geographically you get that kind of blend when you look at the different sort of investing profiles.
I agree. Corinne, I'll be the first to say, as I know we're wrapping up on time here, but thank you for this conversation, and Bill and Guy and everybody else for joining us. I think that at the end of it, there's a lot to learn and a lot to think, but I will say in my own experience, reach out and ask and just talk to somebody about it before you jump in anything, whether it's the investment side or events and trade shows or hiring. Certainly, there is a way to make this work on both sides, but it's got to be very intentional, very planned out with a lot of clarity up front to understand what you're getting into and how the different markets play, because although we speak the same language, we don't do business the same way. And I think it's really important. So thanks for this opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a good evening.